This conference will now be recorded.
All right, everybody, I want to thank you for coming to this webinar today. It's been a really incredible few weeks that we've survived, and we're continuing to fight our way through this. I want to point out a couple of things to you first and foremost. We will take questions throughout this session. You have a chat function I just posted to if you're on with a desktop or a laptop, or you're watching through your smartphone. By all means, we encourage you that if you have questions as we go along, use that chat function and go ahead and ask your question. When we get to the end, we will come back and review all of the questions instead of trying to address them section by section. That'll help us move a whole lot faster. We recognize that you have probably been webinared to death, and so we really appreciate that you've logged in with us today. I think you're going to find that this webinar is unlike any other. You've got not only an excellent panel of experts that are going to be sharing an amazing amount of information with you, but we are also including with this a toolkit that I believe is going to prove invaluable for you. It's going to include checklists, templates, just a lot of resources to help you get back to business and to navigate this new normal that we're all challenged with. The really important thing to remember as we're going through this is that we're trying to help you provide a method for developing a strategy. Every business is different. So this is designed to be practical, and we're going to discuss some scenarios as well as provide general information. And so we are going to begin moving along. And again, this will be recorded. It will be posted to www.etawaChamber.org/COVID-19, no dash, just COVID-19. You'll find a litany of resources there. In addition to that site, we have also developed a site that's going to have all of the toolkit that we're going to be looking at later in this webinar, and that is www.etawaChamber.org/PivotForward. We'll be sending that out to all of you that participate so that you'll be able to go to that page and download the resources directly from there. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you our panel today. They're going to be covering a variety of topics on which they are experts. First, we have Gerald Pentecost Jr. He is a CPA here in town. We have Josh Sullivan, an attorney with Knowles & Sullivan. We have Mike Perkins with Frontline HR Solutions. And last but certainly not least, and I will tell you that we do have full bios on all of these individuals that you'll be able to review at the end of this session. We are proud to introduce to you Kayla Curry with Organizational Impact LLC, and Kayla is going to take it over from here.
Great. Thank you, Heather. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. As we begin with our overview, really to tee up each of our four main segments, we're going to talk about some dual business goals. We know that COVID-19 has impacted nearly every business sector in some way, and the desire for economic recovery is tempered with safety precautions. And as business leaders, we're bombarded with multiple complex issues to address as we prepare to ramp back up. But regardless of industry, dual goals exist right now to either open or re-engage your business so that, number one, employees and customers are confident your facilities are safe. They feel safe in your workspace. And secondly, we're trying to find ways to serve our clients and our customers in a way that's customized to their needs, but yet maintains the competitive advantage of your business. So what does that mean? If we move forward into the next slide, you're going to see a list of a lot of different potential issues that you may be facing today. And as overwhelming as the words are that flash up on that screen, they indicate just as many complex questions or even a prioritization that we have to consider. And so in reality, every single one of these concepts or topics on the screen may be including some questions that you have right now. So how do we funnel all of that down into a way that makes sense for a strategy to get us ready for day one? So when we think about day one of either opening our business back to the public or re-engaging with the public in some way, we know we have a lot of different environments that exist out there. But in order to break this down a little bit, let's talk about some of the priorities that hit the forefront for a day one. And in reality, they really are tactical in nature. So, for example, from a safety standpoint, what should and will the worksite look like for employees and customers, and how do we plan for that? And Mike's going to share some specific details with us shortly. From a staffing perspective, who do we bring back first into a physical work environment, and are there any legal aspects that we need to consider from the choices that employees have to work in a post-COVID or during COVID environment? How do we do that? And then what if we have things that occur after we open? What if someone does test positive, or we have some form of a COVID-19 issue and occurrence in our workplace? How do we handle that now that we are back engaging with the public again? So those are very real. And if you'll notice, those are very tactical, in the moment decisions that we have to figure out what we're going to do. But here's the reality. Beyond day one, it really is concerns that extend beyond that. So in the next slide, you're going to see some additional questions or concerns that we begin to wrestle with. So from a cash flow standpoint, how do we manage our revenue? And what about any loan repayments? If we were fortunate enough to get a PPP, what does that look like? If we were not, how do we manage our cash flow in a very prudent and efficient manner in this ramping back up stage? What do I need to know as a business owner, from the legal front to reduce any potential liabilities? And you're going to hear in a moment from the legal perspective, there are several concerns we have to keep in place to ensure that we have a discrimination-free workplace and that we're doing everything that we can from an equity standpoint with our employees. And even from a longer term perspective, how do we sustain this new environment? Retaining our best talent, which is going to be critical in this time, but maintaining that competitive advantage that we have developed in our businesses over the years. So in reality, for businesses that are re-engaging with the public, you need some form of a 30 or 60 or a 90-day plan that's going to help you tackle these immediate needs, but while also keeping an eye on some of the longer term business decisions. And let's face it, in a COVID environment, a long-term time frame may very well be 30 days or 60 days or 90 days as we monitor the guidelines in our communities and in our states of how we can function with the public again. So I'm going to transition over to Mike, and we're going to start from the safety perspective of what are some of the things that we need to consider. And so this struggle that we have from a point A to point B, we're going to break that down from a safety lens, from a financial lens, from a legal lens, and also from an employee engagement lens. And we'll integrate all of those pieces together so that you can see how each concept really does link to something else in our business. So Mike, I want to transition to you, and we're going to talk about some of the safety considerations.
Thanks, Kayla, and good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the Chamber giving us this opportunity to talk with business owners and operators that are really struggling now with all of these kinds of issues. And let me just say and make it clear, employee and guest safety has got to be job one. Guest or customer safety has got to be job one right now. Yes, we have a lot of operational concerns, and yes, we want to get back to profitability, but we've got to keep our people safe and we've got to keep our customers safe. Some recent research I saw said that 2/3 of those surveyed are scared to come back to work or to congregate in spaces. That's a pretty staggering statistic. However, my personal research I conducted this weekend at Lowe's and Walmart and the grocery store indicated that there's a lot of people out there that don't seem to have a care in the world. and a lot of them are not just visitors and guests, but there are employers or workers as well, because I saw a lot of people not exercising good distancing and not using PPE. And so there's a lot of issues out there. I talked to an attorney last night in Birmingham who told me that lawsuits are already being filed here in Alabama against employers who are alleged to have shown willful and wanton disregard of employee safety recommendations. And so it's got to be our responsibility early on to do the basics at least to make sure that we're keeping our employees safe and our guests safe as well. So right now, day one, many of you are way beyond day one or maybe in the ramp up stage, but you have to prepare and execute a good plan for keeping people safe. Follow the requirements outlined in the new Alabama Safer at Home order from the state Alabama's Department of Health officer. That was issued last Friday, and that is in the materials that will be given to you, or in the toolbox materials that you can take home. And then follow the recommendations listed in the guidelines for safeguarding all businesses from the Alabama Department of Public Health. Those are pretty good, and they're pretty thorough, and they're pretty easy to follow, but you need to make sure you're following those if you want to protect yourself from that allegation or concern about disregard of employee safety. Certainly OSHA and the CDC have guidelines as well that are available to you, and many of you have specific OSHA requirements that you have to abide by. Have a workplace screening process in place, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. And have an employee exposure plan for what happens, what actions are taken, what communications are made, and leave provided when an employee does test positive or comes to work with COVID-related symptoms or has been directly exposed to somebody with COVID. Can we go to the next slide? So you need to have a written policy and procedure related to your new safety guidelines, and train people, train your employees, train your managers. They have to understand what their responsibilities are. It's not just the employer's responsibilities, all your employees' responsibilities to each other and to the public to make sure that they're following procedures. I'm sure that some of the big box places that I went in have very thorough policies, but if the managers and the employees aren't following those policies, then those policies aren't worth the paper they're written on. Prepare to address employee refusal to return to work. You may have employees who absolutely refuse to return to work or to work under certain conditions, and you may even have groups of employees, and I believe Josh is going to hit on that, because there are some protections when people or protest or voice concerns about safety reasons. So you don't want to just jump in and start taking disciplinary action. You need to work to make sure that you've done everything you can to give them a comfort level that you're going to protect them and you're going to protect the public as well. Certainly, you need to have consistent, regular messaging about safety to both your employees and the clients, and signs and meetings, and just the attitude of safety that you display. And then travel limitations. Certainly, we want to continue to avoid travel, employee travel, whenever possible. If it's you can do it remotely, which we've learned you can do a lot remotely now if you want to. Certainly, if people are traveling, put some safety precautions in place so that they are protected as possible. I'm going to talk about a few scenarios. One is, okay, we're moving back into our workplace after a shutdown, or everyone's been working remotely and we're all coming back. So how do we prepare? Well, practical but detailed advanced planning is key. Go through your facility beforehand. Identify all the ways that you can minimize close contact and prolonged exposure for co-employees and customers. From touch, from sneezing, from breathing recirculated air, and handling common equipment. As many risk areas you can identify and minimize those risks, you certainly want to do that. Determine what your local and state and OSHA safety guidelines, which ones are applicable, and apply them. As I said, those Alabama Department of Health guidelines that just came out are really very helpful, and they're very common sense, and they're pretty easy to follow. So you want to make sure that you think about your physical distancing at your workstations, at the time clocks when people are clocking in. You don't want big crowds all gathering around. Restrooms, elevators, break rooms, locker rooms, anywhere there's a potential for close proximity for any period of time greater than just people passing by, because that seems to be the real key to stopping the spread of this virus, is not putting people in close proximity for periods of time where they're breathing the same air, coughing on each other, sneezing on each other, things like that. If close contact's unavoidable due to the nature of the work, then certainly, if wherever possible, utilize guards such as plexiglass shields or curtains, dividers, whatever you can do to keep people from, sharing potential virus back and forth. Provide the necessary PPE. If you require your employees to wear masks or to wear certain gloves or any certain protective equipment, make sure that you provide it. It's your responsibility as an employer to provide that. You also should be providing sanitizing and disinfecting supplies, and your facility should be disinfected regularly. Consider improving your ventilation in any way you can to increase ventilation rates, to increase the amount of outdoor air coming in, and to avoid recirculating air every way you can. Post the CDC signage on good health and hygiene policies. Post the CDC guidance on symptoms of COVID-19 so that your employees will see that. Put them in your locker rooms and in your preparation areas. So in your toolbox, take home toolbox, there are a lot of materials here that are very, very helpful to you that can help you kind of navigate through some of these issues and concerns. So the next issue, the next scenario is, okay, I've got employees and the Alabama Department of Health has recommended that we screen employees. How should I do that? What do I need to do? All right, the Alabama Department of Public Health strongly encourages screening, 2 types of screening. They don't require it, but they strongly encourage it. So the first type of screening is questions presented to employees. These can be done individually on a daily basis, or you can have them on a list for employees to look at and sign off on, or to verbally respond to, or you can just have them where employees are self-responsible for answering those questions. So the questions are things like, have you been in close contact with a confirmed case of COVID-19? Have you experienced a cough, shortness of breath, or sore throat? Have you had fever in the last 48 hours? Have you experienced a loss of taste or smell? Have you experienced vomiting or diarrhea in the last 24 hours? These are all on that public health handout. And then if the answer is yes, then you have to take certain actions. There should be no to all those questions before you proceed as normal. The other type of screen that they recommend is temperature check. Certainly, if you're going to have employees working in close proximity with each other or having a lot of contact with the public, then temperature checks are strongly encouraged. As a best practice, the employer itself, the employer, you as the employer, take the temperature with a no contact thermometer, one of those forehead scans or some kind of no contact thermometer each day upon the employee's arrival at work. And when that happens, you need to pay the employees for the time it takes to go through that process. That is considered work time. The minimum practice recommended is that employees at least take their own temperature before arriving and certify when they get there that they have taken their temperature and that they don't have a temperature. Of course, that's an honor system, and you're putting a lot of trust in the employee that may or may not do it, but may answer that they have. So the best practice recommended by the Alabama Department of Public Health is to take the temperature. Again, if they answer yes to any of the screening questions, or if they have a temperature in excess of 100.4 Fahrenheit, then the employee should leave the premises immediately and should seek medical care or COVID-19 testing or both. Now, the CDC has some guidelines on essential employees, those that you can't do without, who have been exposed to COVID-19 through contact with another, but they're not showing symptoms. That's a risk that you're allowed to take under the CDC guidelines, but be very careful. And they recommend pre-screening those employees, regularly monitoring them, requiring they wear a mask for 14 days, social distancing, and isolating or isolating them if possible, and then certainly having regular disinfecting of their work area. Again, there's a risk, but if that employee is so essential that they've got to be there, then there's a risk balance that has to take place, and the CDC does have some guidance on how you handle that. If you're going to take temperatures, that should certainly be administered by a healthcare professional if possible. You may have a nurse that works for you or someone that's a healthcare professional. If not, a responsible, discreet employee who doesn't go around disclosing confidential information. You would want them wearing personal protective equipment, goggles, gown, face mask, gloves, and train them how to use the thermometer properly, how to disinfect it if it has any contact with people, and to follow the confidentiality and safety rules. You want to have a designated place that you will be able to take temperatures where it's just not an open area, if possible, some privacy and social distancing. Again, you pay the employees for the time they're waiting for their temperature check. You might want to consider staggering start time so you don't end up again with a big line and you don't have the 6-foot separation. Waiting in line is a good time for them to fill out any kind of medical certification or answer medical questions because they're otherwise just waiting. The temperature takers should record the temperature each day for the employee and then look for significant variations from day to day. Those records must be kept confidential, not shared with others. Just because someone has a high temperature doesn't mean they have COVID-19, and all COVID-19 doesn't have a high temperature. So, that's not an absolute sign that someone has COVID-19 because they have a temperature above 100.4. Don't embarrass the employee in front of others. Ask them to step aside to a discreet, isolated place, or you may have written instructions for them if they test with too high a temperature. But then you can have further discussion with them and directions for how to proceed after everyone else is gone or out of the way. Direct the employee to obtain medical clearance or wait 14 days and at least 72 hours of fever-free, symptom-free time before returning to work. Direct them on the available paid leave that's available under the emergency paid sick leave laws. If you do qualify, if you have under 500 employees, you will qualify, even if you only have one. So you have to give them that opportunity to utilize that paid sick leave and any other applicable company leave that might be available to them. But most important, show compassion and respect. Stay in touch with the employees, see how they're doing. This is a scary time for everyone, and we want to make sure that we certainly do everything we can to protect our relationship with that employee. And then certainly take steps to disinfect the work area, to advise others who have been in contact with that employee that there's a possible COVID-19 exposure and that they should exercise highest degree of hygiene and self-awareness of symptoms for symptoms of their own without identifying the employee. And that's the crazy part, but the hard part. But the law tells us, or the regulations have told us, don't say Mary has COVID-19. You said someone in this vicinity has shown signs or may have been exposed, and you need to take these precautions. And Josh will probably hit on that some more, but that's the rules we've been given. And if people, they'll usually know who it is, but we're not going to tell them. So can we go to the next slide? So I guess in conclusion, for my section, have a good thorough plan, tailored to your company, communicate it to employees to keep them safe, include your travel limitations in your plan, train on your plan, on your policy, make sure people understand it, assign someone to be responsible for monitoring conformance with your plan and ensuring that it's executed, and ensure that employees are doing the right thing and that you're following all the guidelines, because you're going to be so busy trying to run your business that you need to have someone whose job it is to really focus on that, and then follow your policy. It's a tough time, and I know everyone's gonna, we're gonna make it through this. We're gonna pull together and do what we have to do. And good luck as you resume your work, and hope your business picks up rapidly. So I'm going to turn it over to Josh. He's going to talk about some of the legal aspects.
Thank you, Mike. Also, as Mike indicated, I want to thank the Chamber for giving us this opportunity. Y'all have done a great job in terms of making sure all the local businesses are informed and kept up to date. So thank you as to the Chamber. Thank you as to Mike and Kayla. They've been very pivotal in terms of getting all this organized. So they've done an excellent job and a great resource to the area. As to, in terms of my part of this, I want to look at the legal complications and legal issues that any type of business should be considering during this time. I think it's important to note, first of all, is in downturns or recessions, or when the economy goes down, then the employment claims, the litigation goes up. It happens time and time again. So don't look at this as being a situation where, well, I can kind of rest, I can relax right now. It's probably the most pivotal time to be very observant of this, being very, very careful, making sure that we're doing things exactly by the book. Now, to throw in this with all these complications and basically looking at all these various issues that we have to look at, throw in the fact that we have new laws, new regulations that are changing and developing really every day. The SBA just earlier last week issued some more advanced regulations, and it seems to be changing every day. So it is definitely a mess. It is very difficult for even attorneys. That I would say amongst fellow attorneys, we've had many debates as to what the law means and as to what should be done. And so, in terms of the layperson, don't trust your own instinct. I think this is a time that, if you do have any questions, if you do have any concerns, that you seek out and get appropriate advice and or help to make sure that it is being done correctly. So let's look at the next slide, please. I want to go over a couple of scenarios and just kind of brainstorm as to potential issues, and really looking at these are common questions, common issues that as being the lawyer to local businesses, things that I'm hearing a lot of questions along these same lines. So the first issue is, our company only needs to activate a portion of the laid off staff. Who should I choose to recall? The first thing that I would recommend as to anybody is make sure you have a policy in place. Now, in terms of a contract, a worker that has a contract in place, or someone who has a collective bargaining agreement, many times that you're already that process and that policy is going to be there already. But I find with a lot of my clients and a lot of businesses that they don't have a policy as to how I should recall or how I should bring back the laid off workers. So I would strongly recommend, if you don't have one now, go ahead and implement a written policy that sets out very specific standards that are to be followed to make sure that the correct process is followed. Now, in looking at that, what should that policy make sure that you follow? Number one is, don't use any type of factors that would not be appropriate under Title VII or any other federal law. For example, don't base it upon age, race, gender, religion, national origin, disability. Or a common concern I hear is, well, I hear John Doe has some health issues. He's certainly at risk. I don't need to be bringing him back. That is not your call to be making. That is his and or her call. So I don't ever want you basing a policy based upon what you believe or based upon any of these contexts that are not permissible. It is always good to do it based upon a objective standard. It can be really the best standard to use, and I say best, but I guess the more common standard is a length of service type of standard. But you can look at other things in terms of their attendance policy, safety contact, quality, previous write-ups, prior disciplines. Something that you, again, have a standard policy that when someone comes back afterwards and tries to question about why that this person was hired and why this person wasn't hired, you can very clearly document and support why that you made those choices. Also, sometimes let the issue resolve itself. If a worker doesn't want to come back, then don't force them to come back if you're not hiring everybody else. So let people kind of make some of the calls. It may be easy based upon certain jobs that I need this job, I need this shift, and you can let that also guide you. So generally, that would be the answer as to the first type of situation. As to number two, how about if a worker refuses to return to work because they are now making more on unemployment than they would if they were working for me? And this is a common issue. We have a lot of people that are potentially making a lot more money than they ever made working 40 hours a week. As a matter of fact, looking at the current stats, I think someone last week shared with the group that was organizing this, is that polling shows that 2/3 of the workers are not comfortable with returning to work. In a practical level, what I would recommend is, as the employer, it is our job to be making them feel safe, to make sure that they know the safety protocols, the safety procedures, the steps that we have taken to provide a safe workplace. And that goes exactly as to what Mike was just trying to explain to us. So I think the first thing is more of an education type of step, is make sure that they know, for whatever concerns, whatever fears, whether rational or not, is just make sure that they understand that we have safety places and safety processes in place that will help make it a safer environment. Now, with that, let me state this as well, and I think Mike touched on it as well, is if you have a policy, make sure it's being followed. That's the one thing that's going to come back to bite you every time, is if you have a written policy and you're not following it, then I can guarantee you that there's going to be litigation and that there's going to be a lawsuit, and probably going to be a large verdict coming from that. So if you have a written policy, please, please, please make sure that that is being enforced and it is being implemented. Also, listen to and as to any workers that may still have a child that they're having to care for. Maybe there's some medical issues or medical care issues where they're having to care for a sibling, a spouse, a parent. Then look for that even though that we are now kind of coming out of the I guess as to the lockdown process, realize they are still eligible for the paid sick leave and the extended family medical leave. That continues through December 31st of 2020. So if anybody still qualifies for that, then that's something that we certainly want to offer that as well. Now, as to one of the things that was just a guidance that was given to us last week from the SBA, and Gerald is probably going to be talking on this, but when you're looking at PPP purposes, when the question was, well, if I try and rehire someone back and they don't come back, am I going to be penalized for it? And luckily they came back and said, well, as long as you have a written good faith offer and they refuse to come back, then you aren't going to be penalized for that. So as to the next step as a part of this process is just make sure that anybody that you're offering to come back to work, that you can put it in writing, make it a good faith offer, make it very clear, again, the safety process and policies that are going to be there. Make sure that the terms are reasonable, and just make sure that that is in some form of writing to them. I would also recommend it be sent via certified mail, and basically track that they are actually receiving that. So let's say that we do that. We make the written good faith offer and they still don't come back. Then what happens? Well, that we can treat that at that point as a resignation. And what you should be doing, and this is true for people that do come back or people that actually do not come back, is there is a portal with the state of Alabama that we could be reporting that once someone is rehired or that they refuse a job, then we can report it to the unemployment compensation division, and they can be taking appropriate action. Now, with that being said, I don't ever want us threatening that we're going to cut off benefits for you. This is what that the state's going to do. Our job is just to let the state know what has been done, that we've either hired them back or they have refused to come back, and let the state take care of it from that point. So basically, just make sure that anybody that is refusing, that there is a process and a procedure that you can report it to the state and make sure that the state's going to take whatever action. Now supposedly that on the back end, that anybody that has continued receiving benefits when they did turn out that they did turn down a job, supposedly that they're going to be cracking down and making charges and claims based upon a fraudulent submission. So, but again, that's between the state and the worker. That is not up to us. So just make sure that our job is to just report it and then let the state take care of it after that point. Number 3, that we recall a worker and the worker immediately request either paid sick leave or the extended family medical leave. Do I still have to recall that worker? I actually had this very situation come up just a couple of weeks. The answer to that is once you've decided to rehire them, you have rung that bell. You cannot take it back. So if you're going to rehire them, then you're still going to have to make sure that you follow in terms of whatever new federal benefits that they are entitled to. If you don't, then you could be sued for retaliation, and in looking at that could be a fairly complex and a very serious lawsuit that could cost you a lot of money. Now, in terms of violations of the paid sick leave or the extended family medical leave, the way that the courts are dealing with this, or really that the law has addressed it, it is going to be treated as a violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act. So in that situation, not only are you going to be obligated to pay whatever wages that employee was entitled to, but you're going to have to pay double wages, or what we call liquidated damages. And then on top of that, and this is probably going to be the most expensive component of it, is the attorney fees. If they win usually $1 off of you, then they're going to be entitled to get usually attorney fees. And that's usually going to be the biggest damage component to this. So be very, very, very careful, because again, this could be very expensive if it is not handled correctly. Let me also state this as well. If you find out that there are existing issues that someone should have been paid for the paid sick leave or the extended family medical leave, go ahead and address that now. Don't wait for someone to make a claim, send a letter, go ahead and bite that bullet and address it now, because it's going to be a lot easier and a lot cheaper if you do it that way. As to situation number 4, what should I do if any worker is speaking about safety issues and refusing to work in certain areas, or they discuss forming a union? Now, in terms of this, what you have to be ultimately concerned with. Some of y'all may say, well, I don't have a unionized work staff. It doesn't matter. Under the federal law, the law protects what's called protected concerted activity. Now, what is that? Well, I'm a Southern Baptist. I've always been raised as a Southern Baptist, and the very best way to explain this is the Bible tells us if two or more are gathered in His name, there He will be also. Well, in terms of protected concerted activity, let's look at it in that same sense. When 2 or more are gathered in the name of safety or work issues, there the federal government will be as well. So in terms of looking at that, when you have 2 or more employees that are taking some type of action, that are disagreeing, expressing concern, or even causing somewhat of a fit sometimes, then you really got to be very, very careful with that. Now, there is a lot of protections, and usually in terms of the courts, that they defer on the worker's side when you're dealing with the protected concerted activity. But there are sometimes limitations. So what I would recommend to anybody is, if you have a situation like this, do not leave this in your own hands. Make sure that you contact someone that understands the laws regarding union, that they understand the laws regarding unions and the federal laws regarding the protected activity, and make sure that you get legal advice. As to the last issue that I wanted to talk about, is my company is struggling financially. Can I reduce wages? Once again, if there is a contract, if there is a collective bargaining agreement, the answer is going to be, well, that agreement is going to control what the wages are. So normally, unless that there is some type of provision under the contract that allows that, then you're probably not going to be able to. But let's say that they don't fall within either of those categories. Then in that situation, yes, that you can reduce wages, but there's a couple of considerations. Number 1, make sure that you don't get them below minimum wage. Number 2 is, if they are exempt employees, make sure that they don't fall below the minimum threshold of $684 per week, so that they can continue being treated as exempt. And overall, I would again really emphasize that don't do this based upon age, race, national origin. If it's based upon a legitimate issue, it's fine. But just make sure that you don't do it based upon any factor that is not appropriate. Looking at the next slide, also want to talk about something that really just came out last Thursday, I believe. The governor actually, as a part of a proclamation, she has indicated, or that she has provided certain protections as to businesses. If there is any type of personal injury or property damage that is from COVID, or any type of COVID response activity, that unless the claimant can show by clear and convincing evidence that the death, injury, or damage was caused by wanton, reckless, willful, or in intentional misconduct, then in those situations that supposedly that you're going to be protected, that people cannot sue you as long as you fall or that you don't fall within that gross misconduct, wanton, reckless type of conduct. Now the question is with this is going to be, realize that the governor did this by a proclamation. As to whether or not the governor had the authority to actually do it, and as to the legal ramifications of it, I'm speculating that it is going to be litigated, and that's going to be an issue that the courts are ultimately going to have to decide as to the extent of the governor's protections given by that proclamation. But with that being said, there was actually a Senate bill that the state Senate was considering, SB 330, that was really going to do this exact same thing, and that really is how it should have been done. And so I would recommend to contact the legislatures, let them know that this is very important to us. This is a major concern, and just make sure that they know that that bill needs to be passed. Going to the next slide. This just goes through the general practical steps. I think I've covered most of these, so I'm not going to repeat them. But let me state this. I think in terms of looking at the situation, people seem to be getting relaxed. We're now returning to work, and things are somewhat returning to a more of a normal state. Don't let your guards down. In terms of any employment, it's not a matter of if I'm going to have someone get the coronavirus. It's going to be when. And so we need to be making sure that we have things in place, safety policies in place that's going to deal with this for when it's coming. Because again, it's not if, it's going to be a matter of when that is coming. So with that, again, I strongly recommend, if you have any questions, you've got great resources in this area. Make sure that you contact them if you're ever in doubt about anything. Now we're going to go to Gerald Pentecost, who's going to be talking about PPP issues.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here today. Josh, you might want to leave yours unmuted. I have found that these PPP loans are as much a legal issue as they are financial and banking. Quite an amazing thing. And I'm going to tell you, I'll kick this off by saying, if you found somebody that is 100% certain of their advice in this area, you might be talking to a shyster, because this thing changes so much. As a CPA, it's very difficult for a guy like me and like Josh to give advice under a constantly changing wave of legislation and bank actions and regulations, and it's been quite a ride, and I'm sure most of you have been on it. Probably speaking mostly to people that have received a PPP loan at this point. However, I actually talked to somebody today that was on his way to the bank to sign his paperwork. So there are still people getting these, and there's still money available, I would gather. So if you haven't gotten it, you might want to holler at your CPA or your banker and see what your eligibility is. It's a pretty good program, and it gives you the ability to help keep your employees on payroll. It has its caveats, as anything with SBA does. SBA is a very strict agency, to say the least. So it definitely has its caveats. But I guess I will speak to the group that's probably gotten their PPP loans, and now we're talking about forgiveness, the forgiveness phase. For most of us, we're in week number 2 or 3, maybe 4 of having the loan in place, and we're spending our payroll money. You can spend up to 75% of it. It's got to be spent on payroll. The other 25% can be spent on, from my understanding, Josh, payroll or utilities or mortgage interest for an office or facility that's not your home office, and that includes utilities, including telecommunications. So, there's some other things you can spend it on, but 75% of it at least has got to be reserved for payroll. There are, and believe me, I attended a webinar just on the forgiveness piece that was a half a day, and you can talk about this a lot. I mean, it's very complicated. It's more complicated than you think. It's not as simple as you think. There are basically calculations that relate to what's called an FTE. If you ever heard of that, it's basically an equivalent employee, a number of employee equivalents. If you have part-time folks, all that works into it. You've got several measurement dates. I'll just say, I'm not going to go through that in detail, but you're going to want to touch base with your financial advisor, your CPA, whoever is helping you. Your banker even can give some suggestions. But get on that pretty quick, because you need to have a staffing plan that helps to maximize forgiveness. That webinar I was telling you about was put on by a large bank, and they had a large CPA firm, and basically he came out of the gate saying, we're telling our clients that all of them are going to have to pay back some of this, because there are built-in parameters in this calculation that make it very difficult to achieve 100% forgiveness. So you're in kind of a position where you're trying to maximize the forgiveness, or who knows, maybe you can. I've got a client that has a pretty big rent bill, so who knows, maybe if you have a big rent bill or a big mortgage interest or big utilities, that's going to be unusual, but that's kind of the game you're playing here. Now this next point is safe harbor. Now Josh he may want to chime in on this one, because I want to say about a week or 10 days ago, Forbes released an article, and I got more calls about that. I mean, it just threw everybody into a panic. Oh no, they're going to evaluate whether or not you needed the loans before they, forgive it. And they even are saying, hey, you've got until May 14th. If you didn't need it, to pay it back, or we may come after you with some criminal charges. In my personal opinion, I think that probably was more aimed at some of the big, bad actors that have gone out and gotten these loans and obviously didn't need it. There's so many reasons. But I think that Josh and I and most of us are going to advise you to at least assess the need that you had and when you applied, and do some documentation, do some memos, talk to your CPA, your banker, your lawyer, just to make sure that your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed in that area. Whenever it comes down to the forgiveness phase, we're going to be going into it. We don't have any of that data yet as to what it's going to take or what that calculation is going to be, what forms are going to have to be filed. We have a general idea what the information is we're going to have to submit to the bankers to get the forgiveness, but the law basically says, it is what it is. There's going to be regulations coming out. There's groups even working on trying to get this clarified. You may have heard of the incurred versus paid debate. Right now, the law says incurred and paid. So if you're to literally translate that, you're going to have to make sure that you pay. A lot of us may be scrambling around to do a stub period payroll right there at the end just to make sure we've paid it and incurred it at the same time. I think there's probably maybe some clarifications and some things forthcoming. I know the AICPA has made recommendations to the SBA and to the Congress to make that simpler and make it more, I guess, consistent in its application. But like I said, I mean, that's really the enforcement activity piece. Who knows? I would just document it. What the certification is, that there was uncertainty when you applied for the loan, and because of that, you need this loan. And uncertainty is a very subjective calculation. There is no calculation of uncertainty, I suppose, unless you're a mathematician or something. It's very subjective, and I think that stay close to your advisor, stay close to your CPA, in the coming weeks, we ought to know a whole lot more. And that's what I tell my clients when they call. And all interesting. The Senate and the IRS are in conflict over tax treatment. Yeah, I mean, the IRS, there's a rule that says that you can't deduct expenses that were paid with tax exempt income. Well, I mean, this forgivable loan's kind of a new animal. It is touted to be tax exempt in the law. But if you don't get to take the deductions, it's not really tax exempt, is it? It kind of moots the point. Most of what I'm reading kind of leans toward the fact that Congress's intent was to be generous with this. So maybe we might see some kind of IRS regulation that addresses that specifically, allowing this to be truly tax exempt. That'd be really something. The forgiveness part, I mean. And there's a blurb in here that actually I stole this whole thing from the guy that did this in Nashville. It's very good. They did this presentation with a CFO out of Nashville for another group. So he mentioned this Main Street lending program. I won't go much into it. The big attractive part of that is the loan. It's a guaranteed loan, kind of like SBA does. I want to say that SBA will maybe ultimately be the agency that does. Right now, the Federal Reserve is who has got that out there. The U.S. Chamber did a good summary on it. There's a link for you. The big benefit there is it defers the first payment for a year. So, and the rates are good. So, keep an eye on that. If you need additional financing, then that may be something you might want to take a look at, or at least stay on top of. They haven't released the final program yet, so no big hurry, but you might want to have that on your radar screen. Flip that slide there, Heather. All right, so leaving PPP loans for a minute, cash flow plans. I mean, this is really more of the getting back to work issues. So, it can be a good time, I think, and it says need a cash flow plan and forecast. Well, that's fancy talk. You'd have to probably pay your CPA to do it, which is not good always, but I think the intent or the spirit there is this is a good time to just cut the frills, make sure there's nothing getting under your nose in terms of expenses. Make sure that you're collecting as much as you can from your customers. Go through your bank statements. Look for recurring items that I'm always shocked how much money is going out the door just in recurring bank items that are not being used anymore. You got to cancel it. It's a good chance to go through, cut some of that stuff, cut the extra expenses for things you're not using. No frills is what you want to do. It's a good time to sit back and evaluate on the expense and cash expenditure side, and maybe going back to that Main Street lending program. Maybe it's a good opportunity to reevaluate operations, look for, make some investments with that finance money to lower monthly costs and cut as much as you can in terms of your processes and your facilities and things like that. The whole idea is the lean and mean are going to survive through this, and that's exactly where we need to be. As far as let's say you're coming back in and you're like, well, I'm just getting started back. I'm behind on my rent already. I'm behind on my utilities. You got to pick out obviously the vendors that have to be paid. You don't want your lights to be shut off. But, if you have vendors, 90-day vendors, trade vendors, banks, landlords, things like that, you need to communicate with them. Don't just ignore them. And I would even take this a step further. Don't get your accountant to call them or somebody that works for you. This is a good chance for the decision maker of the business to reach out and ask for that favor and to work it out. Go into those discussions with the spirit of I'm going to do the very most I can to help you survive, because we're all interlocked together. You might be the company that provides supplies to this other company, and we're all interlocked together that way. So, you should enter into those discussions with, well, I can't do this, but maybe I can do that. But, just failing to communicate or just ignoring the problem is probably the worst thing you can do. So, it gets into, work with your banker, work for, payment deferrals if you need to. Do the best you can to talk to those folks that you have to spend money, and to talk to your customers as well that may be slow on paying you, just to get things flowing again and get things going. It's going to be tough, but hopefully it's a time for being able to evaluate with the extra money you may have gotten for the PPP loan, et cetera, or from maybe some other loans. Maybe you got an EIDL, a chance maybe to to get things more streamlined. So if we come out on the other side of this, you got to hope that you're a leaner and meaner company. So that's kind of all I have to say there. I wanted to, before I turn it back over to who am I turning it back over to? I can't remember. Before I did that, though, I wanted to mention, there are some payroll tax benefits that you need to think about, help save you money. You got to coordinate that with your PPP. You got to coordinate it with other benefits that you've brought in. But it's very important that that if your payroll company or if your payroll people haven't reached out to you with information and questions, you probably need to be touching base with them, because there's a lot of great payroll tax deferrals and credits that are available, and you need to try to take as best advantage of those as you can. So with that, I'm turning it back to.
I'll take it, Gerald.
Yay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And so we're going to go to this final piece of this and really begin to link all of this together. Everyone, we've heard a variety of issues to consider that impact a safe and effective workspace, whether that's opening or reopening to engage with our customers. Safety, legal, and financial issues span many decisions, we know, and those are ultimately going to impact your employees in some way. And so this last segment is going to focus on the priorities and the practical steps that are going to help you inform, but also engage your employees through these issues. An intentional plan for employee engagement is going to have several benefits, many speaking back to the issues that Mike and Josh and Gerald have brought up. Number one, you're going to get greater service to your customers because your employees feel equipped to do so. They understand the new policies or procedures or even in workflow and things that they need to do with their customers. You're going to get stronger engagement from your employees because they do feel equipped and they feel like you've taken as many steps possible to think of the workplace from their perspective and what it's like to take care of customers and what it's like to be on a physical workspace every day and whatever that might look like. And because of those things, your likelihood to reduce any legal liability is also improved through that process. The more you communicate, the more you prevent any possible questions or even misunderstandings that employees may have about the intentions of your business based on your actions. So there are really three main engagement priorities that we talk about in this ramping back up. I know we've got to recognize there are a lot of hybrid environments that may be existing with our business. So let's first focus on safety. So Heather, if you'll take us back one slide for just a moment. The employee engagement link requires an intentionality in helping our employees feel safe as they return to their physical work. Varied perspectives likely exist on your team, and you probably are going to need to balance those employees that have significant fears of COVID-19 for themselves or their family members, along with some employees that may have a more cavalier perspective to the pandemic. And so thinking through and explaining the reason behind these decisions addresses that spectrum that likely exists. Mike and Josh discussed the safety and legal aspects to prioritize. And as important as those business decisions are, it's equally important that we explain the reason behind those decisions with our team. You'll never be accused of communicating too much during this time period. In fact, it's often the biggest perception gap that exists between owners or senior leaders of an organization and those line level employees. And in this ever-changing environment, that communication is going to be even more important. So communicate often, communicate much through this time, but think through what is not going to be assumed through this process. We want to take extra steps to be as clear as possible. And finally, the third priority that you see listed is an equipping need. You know, in the absence of information, our team is prone to fill in the gaps with their own assumptions. It's going to be based on what makes sense to them. And let's face it, we have been inundated through media, through friends, through family, of a lot of information out there about this pandemic. But we have to siphon through to determine what's true and what's applicable for us. And so there's an old adage that says 1 + 1 = 3 if we don't share all the relevant information around that. And that's so very important. So all of your employees need training in your new safety procedures. You know, what that might look like, and not assuming any common sense in that process. So thinking it through for, you know, poking holes in it, as we sometimes say. What are all the possible questions that could come out of this so that we're not assuming? But it's also really important from a leadership standpoint that we think about the emotional element of leadership that's needed right now in this age of COVID-19. You know, there are new levels of uncertainty with our employees, and that could range everywhere from unsure about their role in the future, unsure about their own health or the safety of their family. And so there's a skill that's needed from your leaders that goes beyond just troubleshooting as you begin to re-engage with the public, but being very mindful of what those psychological needs of your employees are. So safety, information through communication, and equipping are really the three main priorities. So how do we do that from a practical perspective? So Heather, if you'll move to this next slide, let's talk about some practical steps. So I've displayed this mindset through a graphic on your screen to help you see this sequencing idea that we're talking about. And you'll see week 0 through a day 1 in week 1, all the way through to weeks 2 through 4 and even beyond. And so our caveat on this is, you know, we have to be flexible based on what our government tells us as far as what phase your county or your city or your state may be in. And so we're always mindful that we may have to move back and forth through these phases from time to time. So if you'll notice on the screen, the level of information grows as we move from a week 0 box to a week 1 box, and finally even to weeks 2 through 4. And it's because our business activity, we hope, is increasing during that time, which means a new level of communication or engagement is needed with our employees to help them understand where we are in the business as we continue to ramp up. So week 0 may look like a pretty small box on the screen, but however, a great deal of thinking and planning occur leading up to whatever that day is that you open your doors to the public for the first time, or if you've been open for a while, going back to assess, have we done everything that we could from a checklist standpoint to make sure that we are where we need to be as we engage with the public. So there's a lot of planning that goes into that, but the outputs here really do include all the tasks and the communication for your readiness. So safety protocols, employee training, staff sequencing, and how we're communicating the who and the when and the how as we begin to ramp up and bring larger pieces of our team back together. You know, any training sessions are critical here. They can be done virtual in small time frames. So we're not talking about, you know, putting your folks through days of training through this, but certainly communicating with them with information that they can read, following up in an online platform to ensure there aren't any questions, and even providing some online classrooms for your leaders as they need that to know, what do you look for? What are we, if we're asking you to be a troubleshooter, what are we looking for? And what do you do if you see something? How do you engage with your team perhaps in a different way? And what are some methods and an approach to consider for that, particularly for those managers that sometimes struggle with feedback and coaching in what we would call a normal environment. So that's really important as we move through this phase. So week 1, those practical tips really do include every aspect of interaction that your team will have in operations. So in fact, you can kind of think about your day 1 and your week 1 like you would when you went through grand opening. So all of the elements around the hype and the energy and the anticipation of the customer and what do we do when this scenario happens versus the other, that's really a mindset that's great for business owners during this time period. So you can begin thinking through, what will day 1 and week 1 look like from a customer experience? What do we want it to look like from an employee experience? And so those are the kinds of things we really are looking at during week 1. So week 1 has to be sustained, and that's going to lead to your well-planned weeks 2, 3, 4, and so on. So you'll notice the emphasis begins to shift here toward assessment. So we're having conversations to figure out what do we need to start, stop, or continue in this environment. And more dialogue about the continued ramping up is going to yield a need for a lot more clarity on your employee messaging and your feedback. So what happens is we ramp up from maybe a quarter of our staff to a half and then to 3/4. And then what if we have to move back to a previous phase according to some type of government regulation? So how do we re-engage back in those initial steps that we had? So it becomes all around messaging. So your toolkit for this particular segment is going to include 3 different employee checklists that provide some tangible preparation steps for each aspect of this. They're tailored to your business. It's a matter of plugging in what do we need to know in each phase, but it does give you a sequencing from a chronological standpoint to make sure that you're not missing what your employee might need. So that's the employee engagement piece. And if you'll notice, everything that we've talked about today, whether it's from safety, whether it's from finance, whether it's from the legal standpoint, in some way touches our employees. And so we would be remiss if we didn't include that element of being very intentional and that planning, just as we do in all other aspects of our business. So Mike's going to transition us into our wrap up and an opportunity for Q&A and talk about what do you do with all the information that you've received today. So Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kayla. I think I'd like for you to run all of our initial meetings with employees because you have such a great attitude and disposition about it all, and we appreciate it. You know, it is overwhelming. We're all a little overwhelmed, but, you know, we're all in the same boat. Everyone's overwhelmed. Even the large companies that you think have it all together are really struggling through this. So don't let it stop you from doing the fundamental things that you need to do to get back to business, get your employees back to work. And that engagement part is just so important. Can we go to the next slide there? So we've called this pivot forward because, you know, in basketball, a point guard or whoever's got the ball usually has one foot planted on the ground, and then they can move the other foot whatever direction they need to adapt. And that's kind of the concept here, is that we're going to have to adapt. We're going to have to innovate. We're going to have to redefine how we do business. So, but we want to move forward. And so, you know, keep that one foot firmly planted and then keep moving forward. You do that through preparation. You do it through innovating your business and employment environment, clarifying your vision. Some of our business visions have changed just over the last few weeks because we see different ways of doing business. Optimize your planning, your objectives, make sure you get there, work very carefully on the timing. But anyway, that's kind of the message today, and we really do want to leave some time for questions. I know we had an hour and a half set aside for this. Can you switch to the next slide? We've given you a lot of good takeaways, and we've tried to simplify. You know, there's so much information out there, but I think if you focus with these takeaways, and then there's later on we've given you some links to important websites from all the different government agencies, because I've spent a lot of time just searching around trying to find the right page for the COVID-19 materials. But we've given you that later on in the slideshow that you'll be able to obtain a copy of. But so where do we go from here? Questions? And I don't see a lot of questions coming in on the chats, but please do, because we want you to, you know, get the most out of this. We want to tailor it to you as best possible.
You guys can type questions into the chat. You can unmute yourself and ask a question. Feel free to do so. I have one question, actually. I know we discussed the Main Street Lending Program just very briefly, and Mike, Gerald, I'm not sure who might be best suited to ask this. Initially, that Main Street Lending threshold was, the minimum was so high that it really wasn't that appealing to small businesses. Have we heard of any changes to that may make it more appealing to our smaller businesses? Have they lowered that threshold any?
Not that best I can tell, there are several different programs under Main Street. Link that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce did pretty good with that. They kind of like outlined. Did you click on that link, Heather?
We can actually look at that in just a bit if anybody is interested in it. I'll be sure that I get.
So it has a little table on it that guide actually is what it is. there are essentially several different possibilities. So you have Main Street new loans, Main Street priority loans, Main Street expanded loans. So the minimum loan size on Main Street new loans and priority loans is 500,000. So I mean, that is, depending on how small you're going, it certainly would be, something that might not appeal to a really small business. But believe me, there's a lot of business around here that got PPP loans of that size. So it does appear that they are working on some smaller company options, but down below 500,000, not at this time. If you read anything about it, you'll see it. They are not through working on that program. So it may be a good opportunity for, something ongoing.
And while we're out here on the interwebs, I'll point out the toolkit again. First and foremost, I want you guys to be sure that you're aware of our Restart Etowah page. There's a ton of information on here, including all of the individual guidelines put out by the Alabama Department of Public Health, the general safeguarding for all businesses that was discussed during this presentation, as well as specific facilities that may have additional things that have to be addressed, the public health order, and all of the takeaways that these wonderful panelists have provided for you. We're going to send you this link afterward, but you'll find them here on PivotForward, the return to work checklist, recall letters. You'll see it's a wide array of things that you can download directly from this site. There's also an employee screening checklist that you're able to download and use if you'd like. So be sure you check that out. Again, we'll be sending that out to you. So do we have?
I want to say, yeah, Heather and the chamber staff have done a phenomenal job with this Restart Etowah website. I've gone to it several times and I'm really impressed by it. Not only that, but a number of educational programming that they've presented. I would say that there are not many organizations or chambers or business groups around that have been as thorough and as diligent as they have of providing good information for local businesses. So certainly commend that, and it's a very user-friendly website. So definitely recommend you visiting that. There's a lot of material on there.
Thank you so much, Mike. We see this as our time to shine. If we're not here to serve our members, then what are we here for? So we do want to ask again if you've got any questions as we wait for those. I'll let Mike send us off, and then I do want to briefly scroll through our bios, and I assure you that any of the folks that participated today would be happy to hear from you. If you had questions you needed to ask offline, you can contact them directly, or you can contact through us. We're here staffing the office Monday through Friday from 8 to 5 every day. So you can contact us by email, by phone, whatever your preference is. If you do want to come by and visit, we just ask that you make an appointment so that we can be sure that we sanitize and provide the proper protections for you before you arrive.
Well, we've either answered all your questions or you're probably wore you out, one or the other. And but it is an opportunity. We still have a little bit of time if you want to submit a question either through the chat or even just unmute yourself and ask. We'll stick around for another minute or couple of minutes to do that. But certainly, it's exciting to get back to work. It's a little nerve-wracking because of all the things that we have to juggle. But I can sense a feel in the air that people are ready to go back to work. They're ready to go back to shopping. They're ready to go back to eating out. And at the same time, we have to, as Josh said, there are some liabilities out there. And if, as an employer, you're not doing the things that have been provided in the guidelines from the state and federal government, then you're at risk because, there are some liability protections that the state will most likely pass, and you may even see some from Congress, but they're never going to exempt people that are willfully and wantonly or recklessly avoiding those steps that are recommended. So I think it's all a matter of showing good faith. You don't have to be perfect, but showing good faith efforts and doing the best you can to try to protect your employees and the customers is really the key. This Alabama piece, guidelines for safeguarding all businesses, it's in the toolkit that we put there, but it's a one-page document. I don't know if you can see me, but anyway, it's a one-page document, and it's really very straightforward. Probably one of the easiest to follow guidances that I've seen from any governmental entity, and it pretty much hits most of the things that are going to be coming, that you'll see from the CDC and from OSHA and everywhere else, unless you're in specific work category where you have a lot more OSHA requirements. And certainly restaurants are in the governor's order. There are very specific requirements for restaurants and for personal service providers like barbershops and beauty salons and nail parlors and gyms, athletic facilities. So you want to make sure you pay attention to those and aren't cavalier or disregarding of those, because those are the ones that can get the most attention, particularly here in the state of Alabama. But I don't see any questions. Don't hear any coming through. This will be the first time I've participated in one of these where I guess we've really worn everybody down and everybody's really tired of hearing all this stuff. And maybe we've just done a great job of answering. I want to thank everybody for participating and joining us today, and all the panelists for participating as well. This website with additional resources I referred to in the slide here, like I said, it's hard to get to the government agencies and find the right page a lot of times. And these are the pages where all the important, where you get the posters from the Department of Labor, where you get the coronavirus guidances that I just mentioned from the Alabama Department of Health. So I tried to narrow these down a little bit. Certainly if you have locations in cities like Birmingham, they have their own additional requirements, and certainly a lot of the other states and counties and cities have requirements. But I've tried to capture most of the resources that are covered, on the financial, legal, and practical sides here on this additional resources page.
I do want to remind everybody this is being recorded, so you can come back and check this out to get the contact information and to look back at those specific resources. I just want to tell everybody it's a rare occasion, no offense to our panelists, that you get an opportunity to get free legal, accounting, HR, and organizational advice and some resources from them. So by all means, don't feel like there is any question too small. We've got a great group right here that has an immense amount of experience. So don't miss this opportunity to reach out. If you don't want to reach out through the chat or unmute yourself, here's the contact information for each of them. Again, we're also here at the Chamber ready to help you. And I can't express my appreciation enough for this team. They bring together a wealth of knowledge, some information that, it would take a single person eons to, just way more than what we're capable of to spend time trying to learn and deliver to you. So we're so appreciative. Thank you so much to Kayla Curry. Kayla actually isn't in our district, but it's hard to find somebody with her unique skill set. And so we appreciate her willingness to remote in with us and participate in this. Thank you so much, Kayla.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to be able to spend time with everyone today.
We also want to thank Gerald Pentecost. He is here local, but he works in a couple of states. He has an expertise, especially in nonprofit accounting and auditing, and we appreciate you so much, Gerald.
Glad to be here.
And Josh Sullivan with Knowles and Sullivan. I know you've had a very busy day. We certainly appreciate the time you've taken with us today, and we appreciate your expertise that you bring to this panel.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, Mike Perkins has been a godsend to us at the Chamber. He reached out from the very beginning. He's provided a multitude of emails and information and has done his best to try to keep us on top of what's changing and what's going on. He's provided a couple of different webinars before this for you guys and has sent us everything that he can find to share. He's for you, I assure you. This was his brainchild that he brought to us and offered to us. And so, Mike, all I can say is thank you so much, because this is way more than what we would be able to provide on our own. So thank you immensely.
Well, it's a pleasure. And again, we're looking forward to everybody getting back to work, and certainly call on us if we can assist you in any way. And it's been a pleasure being part of the chamber. And like I said, I really appreciate the excellent services and information you've provided to all the members.
Thanks
for everyone. Thanks. All right.
Thank you
Have
all.
a great day.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for participating. Again, if you think of a question you would like to ask later, you can go back and access this website, this video on our website. You can shoot us an email and we can help get you connected as well. So everybody have a great day. Thank you. Stay safe. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank y'all. Bye.
Thank y'all.